uncommon that we get called into what's called a PPI. In other words, a pre-purchase inspection. And if you're in the market of buying vintage Alfa, I would always encourage you to do that. There's a couple things we should probably talk about on this. One, PPI should really be done by a third party completely independent of the two people involved in the purchase. It's not necessarily meaning that somebody who knows a guy is going to do you wrong, but the thing of it is if you can find an individual that's very familiar with cars that neither owner or buyer know, you're probably best served, because that person's primary job is going to be just be very honest with what he sees and give an accurate, detailed report. The other thing I wanted to cover is it's often said that the better examples of these classic cars are rarely open market available, and that tends to be pretty true. We find that the nicer examples of these Alfas tend to be traded amongst friends and or just discretionary sales where people just want to have somebody buy the car that is just as much, loving of the car as the previous owner. So this particular car is a very early '67 Duetto. It's so early that it's still on Dunlop brakes. This is a unique situation because the owner of the car has quite a few people lined up who are willing to purchase it, but the owner of the car is being very conscious of selling the car as well represented and not to give anybody some implications of it being something that it's not. So the car is here as a PPI, and it's going to be basically not for any specific purchaser, but just a general assessment of the car's faults and pluses that the owner can provide to whoever he elects to sell the car to. So we're going to get started on this, and what we're going to show you is not only just what is obviously wrong with it, but things to look for if you're looking to buy one of these. There are lots of little things that we have picked up over the years that really give us a good insight of the car's life up to the point in which it's being sold, and we're going to share those with you because some of them will save you hundreds if not thousands of dollars down the road. Okay, so this is an early 105 series car. It has the original Dunlop brake setup on it. The earlier cars, early '67 on back, this is the typical brake system you would see. Whether it was a saloon, a coupe, or a Spider, it didn't matter. They all ran the Dunlop systems. This is kind of a good indicator of whether the car's been worked on a lot in its life or not. In this case, this kind of gives you the indication that it hasn't, that and the excessive amount of grease buildup. But now that we're under the car, I'm going to show you a few really important tips you should be looking for to kind of get a sense of the history of the car. We have to keep in mind that these being four-wheel disc brake cars so early in the four-wheel disc history of a car, that the braking distance on these cars were much shorter than that than anything in the U.S. at the time. And you figure the typical U.S. car probably weighed almost twice as much of this, and it was 4 drum brakes. They weren't used to the braking distance of this car if it was in front of them, so an awful lot of these cars got rear-ended. And there's a few things you can look at that'll tell you whether that ever happened on these cars. Now, on all 105 series car, no matter what it was, a lot of the chassis underpinnings were exactly the same. The car may have had a longer wheelbase, but the underpinnings were still the same setup. And we're going to show you what that's all about, and we're going to show you, more importantly, what to look for to give you an indication of what that car went through in its lifetime. In this particular case, something that shouldn't really bother you. This car, the exhaust system is probably all original, but it's got an awful lot of holes in it. Okay, this isn't a big deal. It might be leverage in getting a good price on the car, but this is a big deal because a complete aftermarket exact factory drop-in exhaust is fairly cheap for these. But nonetheless, this car has that problem. Now the other thing, depending on what a 105 car you have, for example, a Spica fuel tank Spider is a very difficult fuel tank to find. Okay, this being an early car, carbureted car, it's not that big a deal. But this particular car has a pretty big gouge in the gas tank. It's not leaking, and it's functional, but nonetheless, it's got a damaged gas tank. Something to keep an eye on. The Spiders have a sweep to the tank like this, whereas the GTs don't have this aggressive sweep. So effectively, what I'm saying is you can put a Spider tank in a GT, but you can't put a GT tank in a Spider. It'll hit this wall. Okay, so this gives me an indication this car is probably not been tampered with too much in its lifetime. Now I'm going to go on to the things that kind of give you an indication of whether a car has been in an accident or not. On all the 105 chassis, no matter what it was, right here where the spring perch on the chassis is, right up in here, there is this lateral bracing system right behind it. If the car is ever rear-ended, there's always going to be a kink in that lateral bracing. In this case, both lateral bracings on each side are in really good shape, so this car has most likely never been rear-ended. Don't trust the fact that what you can or cannot see in the trunk floor, because sometimes those things can be really well done and you wouldn't have known. So this is a good plus that this car hadn't had, any rear-end incidents. Other thing is make sure that the weep hole on the spare tire tub is open. Okay, this is pretty essential for a couple of reasons. One, it gives the water somewhere to go. But two, it also creates a little bit of a vacuum to keep the fumes from building up inside. Next thing we're going to look at is a fairly common problem. John's going to probably have a hard time seeing this. Maybe not. We're going to have to get all the way over here to the trunnion, John. Before we talk about the differential itself, we need to look at the trunnion. There's supposed to be a rubber wafer right here. As you can see, it's long gone. And what's left of it just fell out. Anyway, these things tend to go gummy and they fall apart, and if they've never been replaced, that means that the bushings and whatnot are probably near their end of their cycle as well. So in this case, this trunnion is going to need some attention, because here's what's going to happen. As this car loads into the turns going left or right, without those wafers up there, the rear end is going to travel a little bit more than it's designed to. It's going to have a little bit of an uncharacteristic lateral shifting to it. So, don't look past those. Those are fairly important to be looking for. The next thing is this being an early car, obviously it is not a limited slip because we don't have our little A casting in there, but you see an awful lot of gear oil all over the rear end of this thing. When we come around to the front side of it, you can see it's had a long history of gear oil leaking from the actual front sill, right where the ring and pinion meets the drive shaft. So that's something that's going to have to get addressed. That's not exactly that cheap nor easy of a repair, so it's something to think about if you're considering buying a car, knowing what's going to cost to fix some of these things. Alright, so now we're going to move forward to some far worse issues. Okay, so now we're all the way up here to where some floor pan repairs were done, along with some rocker repairs. This is critical to look at because these things are really expensive to fix. Okay, so the front floor pans here, you can see where somebody just lapped over a repair panel and cut out, haphazardly might I add, the original pan section and left this open gap. That open gap is just inviting rust to come back. So this isn't a proper repair. This is going to be a problem. And if you see, you got huge gaps all the way around where this pan was put in. So, as you can see, this pan repair was less than good, just to be honest about it. Right here you can see an awful lot of body filler. What is that body filler hiding? Well, for example, here's a big hole right here. Okay. The weep hole is somewhat plugged. You should always make sure that all the weep holes are cleared. And also, up in here, if John can zoom in some. So up here, you can see where the rockers are pretty well damaged. The original jack point on this is barely on there. It's not welded to the rocker anymore. So that's telling me that there's extensive issues inside of here. Okay, between the body filler that was poorly done, the real bad rust issues up inside here, the jack point that's fallen apart, the poorly installed pan. Plenty of things there to be very leery of. You should know to probably sort all this out. That's easily, not talking about repainting or anything, just fixing this, plus the chassis rail here, which has been used as a jack point, because the jack won't hold itself. You're looking at easily 60 to 80 hours to fix both sides of this thing, so that can add up to quite a bit of money. So when somebody's asking commanding money for one of these cars, something like this should be much better than this. So now we're going to look over to the other side. So this side's actually a little worse than the other side. This side, the inner rocker has gigantic holes in it. Okay. Again, lots of body filler, really suspect work, and if you notice, there's no jack point whatsoever over here. Okay. The pan repair wasn't so much over here, but it was over here. You can see part of a pan. The other thing is when a pan's replaced, you should see not only significant primer in place, but it should be also undercoated to protect it. None of that was done. The original E-coating is what I'm looking at, plus some welds. None of it's been primered, so the bottom line is it's all going to come back. And here's a bigger problem. This is a transmission mounting system. It wasn't even welded back up on this side, so this transmission is just kind of hanging on one side. Again, not a very good. So the next thing we're going to look at is this transmission. As you can see, this transmission's just got tons and tons of grease buildup on it and fresh active leaks. Okay, so there's a problem there. The transmission works and functions quite well, but obviously if it's losing its fluids, it's not going to work forever. So this is something else that needs to be paid attention to. The car has a brand new master cylinder on it, but what's interesting is when the car got here, there was zero brake fluid in the reservoir. So obviously there is something going on with this car that needs to be figured out. Whether the car has Dunlops or the Aute brakes, it doesn't matter. It should have phenomenal braking capabilities. And so drivability is everything on one of these. Another thing I want to talk about is look how shot the hangers are for the exhaust brackets. Obviously as the car is running, if these brackets are on full limit like they are right now, this thing is going to vibrate, transmit into the mounting points, thus transmit into the chassis, and it's going to create for a negative driving experience. Now you can probably see the real value in getting the car up in the air, because what it looks like on the street could be a completely different animal once you get it in the air. So now we're going to go to the inside and look what's going on in there. By all accounts, a pretty decent little 67 Spider with a few little issues that we have discovered. And it kind of brought to the point that this can't be the first time something like this has happened, so we thought we should probably share with you a few things that you really should invest in if you're going to be looking to buy an earlier example Alfa. I say that because there's a lot of people out there commanding an awful lot of money for some of these cars, and quite frankly some of them aren't really worth what's being asked of. It's one thing to ask top dollar and back up what you got with documented building of that car versus somebody asking top dollar and have absolutely no history of the car. So we're going to show you a few things that you should consider investing in prior to looking at an Alfa to buy. And one of them is this right here. You can get this at your local parts store, car parts store, $10. It's a compression tech. Okay. On the earlier mild performing motors, you like to see somewhere in the area of 130 to 140 per cylinder PSI. So this is something you should consider having. And the way you would check that on your motor is you would disconnect all the plugs, take them out of the block, put this on one cylinder, have the throttle full open, and crank it until the needle quits moving. If it registers somewhere in between 125 to 140, the cylinder's good. Disconnect it, move on down to the next one, and just check all 4 cylinders with one of these. This is going to save you a lot of pain and suffering, because these Alfa motors are now incredibly expensive to build anymore. And this simple little tool can really give you an idea whether you have a car that's gem or junk. The other thing you should really consider buying is something like this. We have 2 different examples of these. And this is a fiber optic borescope. It has a digital screen on it, so we can effectively send this thing down into the rockers and get a good visual inspection of what it looks like inside the car. You could buy a relatively inexpensive one like this for about $125. We tend to use this one. It's smaller, so it's able to get into tighter areas by Snap-on. It's substantially more money, but we use it quite frequently, and we've used it on this car, and we've discovered quite a few things that are rather surprising about it. But anyhow, we're going to show you where to start and where to stop really on a pre-purchase inspection. In this day and age, with the amount of money these cars are going for, I would never probably buy one of these for good money if I don't have the availability to put it on a lift and thoroughly inspect it. If you're not really comfortable with what you're looking at, then you should probably bring in a third party. When I say a third party, I don't mean the owner's buddy, but somebody mechanic that is more than qualified looking at them. They can put the car on the lift, that you could be there and visit that inspection while it's happening. This will give you a better overall experience, and you'll know what you're buying. Something else that doesn't really stand out when this car is on the ground. When this car is sitting on the street, the rockers are fairly low and they're not that easy to see. But right now the car is slightly up in the air. You can see that there's probably something very funny here. The rocker system, or sills, are supposed to be perfectly squared, so to speak, all the way across the bottom. Okay? So I'm going to show you what they should look like. It should be something more or less like that. Fairly squared. But in reality, because of the poor repair done on the front of this car, this is what it really looks like. You see that huge gap? That's no good. The reason that's happening is all this is false. All this is just completely poorly fabricated, and it's going to be an extensive repair to make happen. The difficulty in this car is the person who owns it is a particularly honest person. He wants to make sure he is showing the car as it really is. And unfortunately, I think when this person bought this car, it wasn't shown to him as it honestly was. So he kind of got caught in the middle. Okay, the other thing is when you're looking at one of these cars, pay attention to what you're really seeing. The gap should be fairly clean. Here and here. But if you see down here, I can literally put my finger in there. Okay, that is way off. If you look, the style line is not continuously straight across. It actually comes up. So this is wrong. So these doors on both sides need to be adjusted. Between the gaps being okay to the front and rear, but horrible on the bottom, between that and the conjunction with this poor repair right here, there's all sorts of warnings right there. That doesn't mean the car is not buyable. It just means that it certainly doesn't stand to get commanding money, because it's going to take a great deal of funding to get this right. So I don't know how well this is getting picked up on camera, but the paint job on this car is horrible. It's not a 5-footer, 10-footer, or a 20-footer. It's quite obvious from great distance that the paint job is pretty bad on it. And if you can really see, you can see crazing. Crazing is kind of like where the paint has this crackling effect to it. And the problem with crazing is it's an indicator of one of two things. Either there's an excessive amount of body filler underneath it that never fully cured before paint went on it, or there's an excessive amount of paint on it. Either way, it is a undesirable effect, and it's also an indicator that something has happened in the previous experience of this car to create that problem. So that should also be a warning. Not necessarily that a car has poor paint job does that mean that it's worth substantially less. It just means that somebody didn't go through the care they should have to prepare the car for a proper paint job. The other thing with this car is there's all these super fine little blisters in it. They're not rust bubbles, they're blisters. And there's typically only two things that cause that. Either one, the air lines were contaminated when the vehicle was painted, or two, the wrong additives were mixed into the paint prior to it being sprayed onto the car. Both cases, that indicates it's been less than a professional experience that did it. So that's also something that should really stand out when you're looking at one of these. And also on some of these Alphas, there's subtle little differences between the years, and you should be fairly familiar with what those differences are if you're looking to invest in one of these. For example, on these early cars, there's a real subtle bump right here. I can't tell you how many times these cars come into the shop and that has been perfectly smooth. It's not uncommon the front end of these cars have been hit because they sat so low. And it's always called a parking lot or a garage hit, okay? Because typically a car parks in front of it, doesn't really realize how close it is to it, and it hits it right here. Body shops don't realize that style line is supposed to be there, so they pound it flat. Okay, so the point is get really familiar with what the nuances of each one of the models are, so when you're looking at one of these, you're a little more informed as to what it should or should not have. Okay, earlier cars like this, being an early 6.7, is supposed to have 15-inch wheels, and this one does. And the thing about it is what's unique about this is somebody would look at this and go, oh, well, that's not right. That's not what came on it. And to a degree, that is absolutely correct. But here's the thing. These 15-inch wheels, and these are running 155/80/15 BF Goodrich tires. Really strange little thing here. These wheels were put on at the dealership when this car was new. We have the original invoice that shows these wheels as being a dealer installed item. So now it's just a matter of what is right or wrong. There is no right or wrong. It was relevant to the time in which it was bought. So it comes down to aesthetics. If you like it, great. If it's not your thing, put on what's supposed to be there. 67 and earlier, that's supposed to be a 15-inch wheel. If this was a 69 model car, that's supposed to be a 14-inch wheel. It's those little things you have to really get familiar with when you're looking at one of these. So Commanding Money needs to have the right appointments to it. So you called and made your appointment with the owner of the car to come out and see it. And the person who owns the car wants fairly strong monies for it. Well, the thing of it is a fairly strong price tag should come with a car that runs quite well. And it shouldn't have any trickery to it. In this particular case, what I would highly recommend you do is that on that call at that time when you're supposed to show up to get the car, first thing you should do is pop open the engine lid and put your hand on the motor. If it feels like that motor's been ran, you should ask why. Because if it is a honest little car and you're the first person to come see it that day, that motor should ideally be cold. It's better to start with a cold motor and get an indication of how difficult it is to start and any of the subtle little nuances about it to get it running versus a car that has been thoroughly warmed up prior to you getting there. All sorts of things can happen in between. A car that is not been started up that day, you can typically see smoke coming out of the exhaust, which may be an indicator of a valve or a ring issue. These things can actually be ran out, so once the car is good and warmed up, those things may not show up. So it's essential that if you're going to go see a car, make it the first part of the day, make sure the car is good and cold before you get there. That way you're getting an honest assessment of what's going on with the car. And also, if a car is being offered for very strong money, so there's lots of little things you should really pay attention to. And it may be a little geeky, but it's the truth. Like all the little straps on it, they should be correct to the period if possible. For example, this one's incorrect, but this one is correct. You can see right here, these are called Roma block style clamps. Those clamps are appropriate for the car, but these are incorrect. Okay, so just the little things like that are things you should be very aware of when you're looking at one of these. Also, take a good look right where the brake reservoir is at. If there's been maintenance issues with the car, you're going to know it because most likely the paint's going to be burned away from where the brake reservoir was at. And these are things, again, if the car is being offered at strong dollars, that should be nice and clean and it should be ideal. Alright, so now we're going to come back to the trunk, and there's a couple things kind of give me an indication of how obsessed the previous owner was with the car. And there's a couple really well-known problems with the Duettos. For one, back here where the resistance springs are to hold the trunk lid up, if it's on the furthest out setting, okay, and that does that, those springs are about past it and they need to be replaced. Because at that point, they're already fully adjusted out. Okay, so that's something to pay attention to. The other thing is that these cars were really known for having a bad crack that would form right here. Okay, so be looking for that because oftentimes, if that starts to crack, it only gets worse as time goes on. So those are things to pay attention to. No matter what the model is, you always want to take the spare tire out and inspect underneath it because what may be ideal underneath may be a problem that's starting to develop on the inside. Okay, so take the spare tire out and see what you got. You'll always be surprised sometimes what's underneath here. Okay, that is one clean spare tire tub. It looks really good in there, and that is rare. Usually you see either starting to see some surface rust in there, which can be an indication of the trunk still starting to go bad, or you know many other options could be going on there, or the boot around the gas tank might be leaking. Tons of things that could be happening there. But this particular one looks really good, really good. The irony of it is, it's got the original spare tire in it. Now in this particular car, I'm not going to be too hard on the trunk, because if that area right there is already good and dry, most likely the next area that we would always want to look at is going to be in good shape as well. And that would be over here, where the gas tank sets in. If you are involved in a car that's got a lot of moisture issues back here, usually you're going to have rust down there at the bottom of the tire tub. You're going to also have rust starting to build up right around where the tank is. And a good indicator of that is look at the screws that hold the gas tank down into the placement. If those things are rusty, you probably got issues that are developing underneath that tank. But in this particular case, this car looks really good. One of the other things that you should really start to pay attention to, and you'll be amazed how expensive they are, is where are the spare tire tools? You know, like the jack, and if you see the tool bag in here, that's an amazement in itself. But the essentials, you know, to keep the car maintained should be here as well. And this car doesn't have those items on it. Okay, so now you did the complete walk around on the car, and it's time to go out on a drive and see what you got. There's several different things that you should be experiencing at the same time. No, we don't want to hear the radio, but we do want to hear the fan run. If it makes a little bit of a weird sound on startup but then clears out, that's perfectly okay. Basically what's happening is the fan down there, it kind of sits for a while, and then once it warms up, it kind of lifts up a little bit and creates clearance. Now if you hear a lot of noise when the fan first turns on, that is a problem. And let me tell you, getting the heater assembly out of one of these is pretty difficult to do if the interior is in, so it's not a job to take lightly. But while on the driving experience, get the car up to a fairly decent speed, barely have your hands on the wheel, and then stomp on the brakes. It should track and brake straight. If it pulls to one side or another, that's an indicator of an issue. It doesn't mean it's a huge problem, it just means that something needs to be addressed. Okay, another thing we want to start paying attention to is every switch in the car should work. Okay, check the fan, obviously, check the wiper motor, no matter where you live. Check the wiper motor, because again, these little items, you know, the car's being offered for strong money, these little items really need to be in tip-top shape. Check the fuel gauge, make sure that it's working. Check the oil pressure. Now the oil pressure, here's the thing, don't take a car on a 2-second drive. You know, if you are only going to go for a short drive, let it sit there running in the guy's driveway for a while before you go anywhere, because you want that oil temperature to go all the way to where it's supposed to be in its full running state. That way, when you have the car out on the road, you'll see how much oil pressure movement there is. The thing of it is it should sit fairly strong. And the water temperature gauge. Typically you don't see the water gauge go bad on these, but nonetheless, as like everything else in the car, it should work just as well. If it's a convertible, open the top up. If the top's down and the guy tells you, well, he never puts it up, well, that's not here nor there. It still needs to go up. You need to be able to close it. You need to make sure that it's good and tight. You should make sure that there's no air gaps in it. You know, as nice as it is to have down, and it might be a nice sunny day when you're driving it, put the top up anyway. You know, close it, the windows and everything, and see if there's any heavy noises coming around the convertible top, because if you're driving the car in the wintertime and it's raining, nobody wants to be just as wet with the top down as you would with the top up, which is a really large problem, because what happens is a lot of these tops get replaced, and the people who replace them don't know how to adjust the cabling system to keep the top tight while it's in the closed position. Not to mention there's gaskets in there. Those gaskets you sit across the top of the head are really tight. You should have fairly low air noise inside the cabin. Check the gaskets around the frame. They should all hold the window tightly. There should be a whole lot of rattling to them. These are the little things that doesn't seem like a whole lot, but if a car, for example, is offered for 20, 25, 28,000 bucks, as I've seen some of these Spires go for lately, then it should really be on the top end of what you would experience.